Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable. The topic that we're going to touch upon today is your top 10 checklist to set up a company in China. Now, while the process to set up a company is not as complicated as you might think, or at least as it was when I arrived in 2004 in China, it is not without its complexities. It is certainly a different type of process as you would experience in Hong Kong or the UK or in other directions. In today's roundtable, we're going to be looking at 10 definitive points on your checklist that hopefully will help you to get your China business up and running. So let's touch on these 10 points. The first point that I want to touch on is partnering with a market entry advisor. What does this actually mean? So setting up a business anywhere in the world in any jurisdiction can always be a challenge, particularly if you're not familiar with the local legislation and the local regulations and ultimately what you can and cannot do. So it is very clear to see that setting up overseas is definitely going to be a challenging act. In today's world where there's a pandemic and where COVID is still live and still thriving in China, with borders being shut, it is ultimately more difficult to be able to get on the ground advice in relation to setting up your business in China. Now, let's face it, China with its nuanced legal and company formation process can actually be difficult for understanding purposes. Now, while you can absolutely choose to go it alone without any form of advisory, you may find that working with an advisor, with a consultant, with a lawyer who has the local knowledge, it just ensures that you complete all the necessary steps that are necessary, but also that it gives you help in some of the difficult decision-making processes that do occur as you are setting up your business in China. The next point that I want to touch on is choosing a local incorporation service agent. Now, ultimately, when you are establishing your business in China, you have an advisor who's going to guide you through the decision-making processes, help you identify what you need to think about, what options you have, what are the pros and cons of certain structures. You ultimately also have to define a local incorporation service agent. Now, most law firms will outsource this to providers that they've been working with for years. In many instances, they don't actually act as the incorporation agent themselves. So I'm giving you this knowledge base where you are now aware that there's one party that does the advisory, the market entry advisory, and there's also then another party that actually physically takes the documents, submits them, and has the contacts with various government offices. To give you transparency and clarity, it is important to check that you are working with the providers that you want to work with, and that you are familiar with the actual processes as you are establishing your business in China. Keep in mind that when you work with a legal firm, they're always going to incorporate the incorporation fees and make a margin off of the incorporation process. And there are other service providers out there that do the same. So just be aware of this and do your benchmarking on who you would like to work with as you're getting your advice and who is actually going to execute the incorporation for your own entity. The next one, point 3, is choosing your business activity. Now, when you are choosing your business activity, or when you are realizing the activities that you actually want to perform in the Chinese market, this leads on to all the other points that we're going to reflect on in today's presentation. So it is important to understand, what do you want to do in China? What activities is your entity going to be performing in China? Is it going to be an import entity? Is it an export entity? Is it both? Does it do domestic sales? What type of domestic sales? Is it e-commerce? Is it retail? Is it wholesale? How are you going to trade? What do your trade transactions look like, or your service transactions? It's really important to understand a full list, like getting a piece of paper and putting in bullet point exactly what you want to do, and also understanding what products or services you want to deal in when you are operating in China. The reason why I say this is because once you have this list readily available, the next step is understanding whether that fits into the negative list that is available to all companies. The negative list highlights what industries and sectors are prohibited in China and restricted in China. So it gives you a sense of where you still need to work with a joint venture partner, where you need to work with perhaps a silent partner. It gives you all of this insight. And again, once you understand what activities you're performing in China, you go to your market entry advisor who's going to explain to you what you can and cannot do in China based on these activities. So it's really important to formulate that. And a simple action you can do, take a blank piece of paper or open up a Word document and in bullet form, put literally every little thing you can imagine doing. One way that I would recommend doing it, and that I do it in meetings with clients, is to actually draw out the supply chain. So you understand the product flow, cash flow, services, who's going to perform those services. It makes it very clear which entity does what activities and in which jurisdictions. So just a little bit of a tidbit there for you on this action point. And like I said, this then leads on to all the other action points that we're going to go through in this checklist this week. Number 4 is determining the legal structure that fits your business activity. Now, if you find out from point 3 and you list out all your business activities and you find out that there are certain items that are restricted or prohibited in China, that leads you to then realize, do we then actually have to consider a joint venture structure? Do we then have to understand whether we need local partners to come into this investment? And that determines then the actual legal structure you're going to incorporate, whether that's a joint venture structure, whether that's a wholly owned structure owned by you, and how you're going to actually then navigate the actual entity establishment. Okay, so do the business activity step first. Go to your market entry advisor, whether that's a law firm, corporate service provider, to get advisory around what then is the legal structure that you need, or the business model that you need to fulfill those activities that you want to do in China. The next thing to think about is owning shares in your company. Now, the beauty of China is that you have the ability to set up your own company owning 100% of the capital, owning 100% of the shares of the company. However, if you find out that in your business activities that you want to perform in China, you need to have a joint venture partner, this limits the shareholdership of the entity that you're setting up. And you need to then be aware in that specific category or sector, do we need to have a 51% ownership from a Chinese investor? Could we own 51% and the Chinese investor owns 49%? It gives you an understanding of how you want to split the shareholdership between more than one investor. Now, also to just say, regardless, if you formulate the business activities and you have the ability to own this entity all by yourself, it doesn't mean that you cannot ask for investors. If you feel you don't have enough financial resources available, you can ask for more investors on a global scale to join within this structure. Now, again, this is where I would go to a market entry advisor and understand whether it then makes sense to have this joint venture structure with multiple investors who are providing capital into a Chinese company or into a holding company that is in another jurisdiction that then holds the shares of the company in China. So again, a lot of food for thought, a lot of options available, but the whole point for today is to give you a definitive action plan with these 10 points on how to discuss with your market entry advisors or your lawyers on how best to structure the business. And remember, thinking, how can I protect myself? How can I protect the company in the long term? A next actionable point is finding your ideal location, right? Where in China do you actually want to establish this company? And of course, this will also come down to the business activities that you are going to perform. Potentially, you might find that automotive sector is predominantly in Changzhou and Changchun. So perhaps you have to be based there. You might find that the toy sector is predominantly in the Guangdong region. You might find that high tech is in the Shanghai region. So understanding the business activities and the products that you're dealing in, this could already lead you to ideas on where is the ideal location for your business entity. I always think it's not wise to choose in a location based on employees, because employees come and go. What is stable is the industries and sectors that are in that neighborhood or in that city, right? So what do you need to think about? You need to think about where your suppliers are. You need to think about where your customers are. Where can you find skilled labor, blue collar workers, white collar workers? You need to think about whether your business is heavily reliant on imports and exports. Therefore, does it make sense to be near a port, Shenzhen port, Ningbo port, Shanghai port? Does it make sense to be in a free trade zone where you have bonded, unbonded warehouses? Do you need a bonded warehouse available to you? And don't forget that you might find, oh, well, actually we have two ideal locations in China where we want to place our business, one of them being Shanghai, one of them being Ningbo. I'm making it up now. How do we coordinate that? Well, ultimately, when you're establishing your company, it can only be established in one location, but it does not mean that you can't open a branch office in the other location to expand on that as well. So there's always solutions. But again, this is why point number one was find your market entry advisor who can give you this advisory around how to establish this business model that you're looking for in China. Now, another way to find your ideal location is to talk to real estate agents. And I always feel that not enough small, medium-sized companies do this. Go talk to a real estate agent because they offer the service of location studies based on your sector, based on your industry, based on your budget, based on skill, where you can find skilled labor for your specific industry and sector. They can coordinate that based on where your suppliers might be from a geographic perspective, where your customers might be. That's what real estate agents do. They do these location studies and then they actually find you space in those locations. So they can help you to narrow that down. That would not be the market entry advisor doing that. They're doing things more from a legal business model perspective, tax perspective. Really, the real estate agents are the ones who are finding you the ideal location within China. But this then leads me to point number 7, which is finding your office space. You need to work with real estate agents to help you find these spaces. Okay, they will have the insight into where you can have your registered office address that is within your budget. Okay, now the motto I have around location and office space is location, location, location. It is critical that you find the right space and that you take the time to investigate this. From a market entry advisory perspective, legal and tax, there are legal and tax consequences around your registered office space. So it's not something you should be rushing into. It is something where you should be really investigating what is the right city for you, for your business, for the long-term growth. What gives you the right preferential treatments in terms of tax? There has to be a balance on all aspects. And again, talking to a real estate agency who can do the location study, but then also work with your market entry advisor on the legal and tax consequences is critical. So it is really building up that network locally as well. Point number 8 is naming your company. Now, this is also a big homework where it should not be rushed. Again, these are all actionable points that you can take as part of your checklist. And again, if you don't want to work with a market entry advisor, these are things you're going to have to do in any case on your own, because these are the basic points that you need to establish the entity. Naming your company in the Chinese language is critical. And why do I say it's critical? I say it's critical because, one, there are millions of companies that are registered in China. It is harder and harder to find a good Chinese name for your company based on the business activities that you want to do. So this is why I've highlighted the business activities at the beginning as one of your first action points, because Based on these activities, it will also help to generate the name of the company based on the overall sector or industry that you're in. So for example, as an accounting firm, we're categorized in the group of management consultants, and our company name is Woodburn Management Consultants Shanghai Company Limited. If you are in mechanical engineering, it could very well be that your name would be Woodburn Mechanical Engineering Shanghai Company Limited, if Shanghai is the place you plan on being in. So you can see how all of these points are reliant on the next step, right? Another aspect that I want to highlight under naming your company is the fact that what you name your company will have no reflection of your trademark registration in China, nor your domain name registration. So as you are naming your company, take these 3 points into perspective. 1, the name of the company. 2, have you done your trademark registration? And if you registered a Chinese name, check whether that name is available. There is no guarantees. And 3, have you registered your Chinese name, domain name in China? If that is something that is part of your marketing plan, right? You've got to think about having all of this. Now, I do have clients who have a very different Chinese brand name compared to the name of their entity because it was not available for registration. It's just something that might happen. No choice around that. So I do want to highlight that to people. Make that your homework. When you're thinking about naming your company, think about the trademark registration, think about the domain registration. The next step is getting your paperwork done, which is not always so easy. And I think every incorporation agent will work in a very different way. I know a lot of local incorporation agents who do not even check the paperwork that they create or draft with their clients. They just go ahead and incorporate. This is great delegation work, gives you no responsibility or liability, but in the end of the day, you don't actually know what information is being used to incorporate the entity. So definitely work with an incorporation agent that gives you this transparency and clarity over what is being submitted, what information is being submitted. Now, I can only tell you how we work at Woodburn. At Woodburn, what we do is we provide a questionnaire to our clients, which highlights 9 key decisions that the company has to make. And it's actually in relation to all of these points that I've just mentioned. What's the Chinese name of the company? What are the business activities going to be? What is the capital investment that's going to be put in? This is not something I've actually put in today's list, but it is an extra additional item that needs to be thought about. What are you investing in terms of money into the business? We look at the management structure. Who are you going to appoint within the entity? How is that going to look like? So we need all of this information in the questionnaire. We then submit this online to the Ministry of Commerce. We wait for approval. We then get draft documentation. And this again becomes a critical point. At Woodburn, we revise these draft documents to make them more cohesive, coherent, complete. We don't base everything off of the draft that's given to us from the Administration of Industry and Commerce. We supplement it, basically, meaning that your company bylaws become a little bit of a thicker document than a smaller one. And we then do all the necessary translations, again, to give clients the transparency they need so that they know what they're signing. And then we are emailing all of that. Client has to print it out, courier it back in original format, and we do the remainder of the submissions. Part of the whole paperwork is also getting the bank accounts opened. It's about getting your CHOPS, getting the import-export licenses, getting your tax registration done, etc. That's all part of the incorporation stage. It is critical that you have this level of transparency and clarity over the process and have an understanding of how tedious and old-fashioned it may be. Now, a very hot topic is about applying for visas. With the pandemic and with the borders being shut, there is good news that we can highlight, which is the fact that you can apply for visas for foreign nationals now who are looking to be relocated to China. PU letters are no longer necessary. But perhaps what you weren't aware of is that before you can actually apply for work permits and residence visas for foreign employees, you do need to have at least one mainland Chinese person on your payroll who will then activate the system to be able to get foreigners coming into China. Some may see this as a limitation, others obviously don't, but you do need to have that one mainland Chinese person on your payroll before you can start applying for anything. Now, getting work permits and residence visas, I'm not going to go into the details right now because it is literally changing on a daily basis. It is feasible to apply for them now. PU letters are no longer required. Process is pretty much similar to how it was pre-COVID. The only difference, obviously, is that once you enter China, you have to go through the quarantine regulations, which are new compared to 4 years ago, right, pre-COVID. Something to keep in mind is that where your company is registered is where these foreign employees are going to be employed, and where, in theory, they should also be residents. Meaning that once they arrive, they will have to show proof of residency, i.e. an apartment or a house rental contract, to show that they are living in that city that you have chosen for the registration of your company. If you want them to be based in another city, then you have to start thinking about expanding your structure and setting up branch offices to then help to bring these employees to the foreign employees into those other locations. So to finish off today's presentation, what are the takeaways that I would like you to think about? One is partnering with a local market entry advisor. Get help. Do not do this alone. Do not rely on employees that you've just hired, that you've barely met, to give you this advice. Go to somebody whose day-to-day expertise is on market entry advisor. And again, obviously that can be Woodburn, but alternatively, that can also be a law firm. It can be other corporate service providers that have this local expertise. Choose a local incorporation service agent. Now, like I said, most law firms have their own network of incorporation service agents that they don't tell you about. Their fees are incorporated in the lawyer's fees, which is why, and then they add a margin, which is why legal fees tend to be very high. Investigate, ask these questions. You can always work with a law firm to do some of the incorporation and then use an incorporation agent or a corporate service provider to do the remainder. For example, I'm currently working with clients that are using Bird and Bird, Squire Sanders to incorporate their entities, but they will only incorporate until the business license is received, the CHOPS are received, but then all remaining steps in terms of tax registration, import-export licenses, as well as bank account opening will be done by us. So you can actually split that out if you like as well. Choose your business activity. What are you doing in China? Like I said, a tip that I can give you, open up a Word document or even take a piece of paper. I find it always easier. Draw out your supply chain. How do you see the transactions happening? How do you, with every entity that is in the supply chain, what responsibilities do they have? This will give you guidance on the business activities you're actually going to be performing in China, and then give you insight on what you can and cannot do, what is restricted, what is prohibited. Once you've done that exercise, determine the legal structure that fits your business activity, right? And talk to overseas and local advisors on this topic, because the local advisors will help you on the structure and the business model formulation. Your overseas advisors should make sure that it interconnects well with your HQ and the structure that you have in your home jurisdiction. Point 5 is owning shares in your company. Understand who is the owner of the company, what will be those consequences. Get the overseas advice from your overseas tax advisors on this. Investigate whether you need to have a joint venture partner, or investigate whether you need financial resources in the form of other investors to come in, and that might then change your business model to have a holding structure. Point 6 is your ideal location. Where do you want to situate your company? Which city? East, west, north, south? Think about using a real estate agent to do a location study on your behalf. Finding your office space. What is your budget? right? This all leads to then creating a budget, understanding how much you're willing to spend, understanding how you want to start your operations. Do you want to start in a business center? Do you want to start up in your own office? There's no right or wrong here. It's just about how does your operation look like, right? Who is going to be on the ground? Who's not? Do you need external help in terms of, I don't know, a receptionist at a desk through a business center? What are your actual needs in terms of running the company? Don't forget though, you do need a registered office address. So you do need to do points 6 and 7. Virtual offices are considered illegal in China. Point 8 is naming your company. Think about who you're targeting, spend time on your name, think about your trademark registrations and brand protection, trademark registrations, register your domain name if you're going to do all of that in Chinese. Now, I just want to say this is not mandatory because, for example, at Woodburn, we are not targeting Chinese companies or individuals who are looking to set up in China. We are targeting foreign investors that are looking to set up in China. All of our branding is in English. All of our marketing is in English. Hence, we have protected our English name of Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. We have only registered our Chinese name for the company establishment. We've not registered that in terms of branding or domain name because we don't need it. It's not who our target market is. So think very carefully on who you're targeting. Getting your paperwork in order, use an appropriate provider who will go the extra mile with you. I always talk about the value ladder. You want to work with providers who will grow your business with you, who are creating a foundation to protect your business with you because their incentive and their mindset is they want to work long-term with you, not for you. Okay. So I do talk a lot about the value ladder when you're working with service providers. Do have this in the back of your mind. Work with somebody who gives you the transparency and clarity you need in terms of creating that foundation of that company establishment, but then also think about growing and scaling the business. Point 10 is applying for visas. Are you relocating foreigners? Make sure they are protected. Make sure you know the rules, understand the visa requirements. What I didn't mention earlier is also think about the costs associated with this right now. Flight tickets, whether you can get one or not, are outrageous. If I can give anybody a tip, is talk to their chambers of commerce who are organizing special shuttle flights, if you will, to specific locations in China to get foreigners in. Prices are reasonable through that versus booking on Expedia.com or booking.com. Try and go through these the chambers of commerce locally in China. They're fantastic and they're doing an amazing job with these shuttle flights. And last but not least, get your business plan and your budget validated before starting to execute the China strategy or before executing the incorporation in China. It does not hurt to get this stuff validated and to understand where you potentially might have loopholes in your strategy, which need to be plugged in order to protect your business. So if you have the financial resources again, and this is not going to cost you an arm and a leg, do try and get your business plans and budgets validated. For those that have participated live, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway from today was. You can put it in the chat box. It's always good to know what people have taken away from these roundtables. And I have just listed a couple of questions that did come in from people who couldn't show up live that I just want to list out here. So one of the questions was, how long is it going to take for the incorporation procedure? Roughly, it's around 3 to 4 months. A lot of it is dependent on you as a company and your reaction and how decisive you are, how quickly you make decisions. From the service provider perspective or the incorporation agent's perspective, normally as soon as you receive information, you pass that on to the client to make that decision, right? Giving then the pros and cons around that, whether it's changing the business activity scope, changing the registered office address, whatever it might be that the government is requesting before granting approval of your company incorporation. In general, it's 3 to 4 months. of which 1 month, 30 working days is around bank account opening. What is the best way of tax planning when setting up in China? Talk to a tax advisor, not just in China, but also overseas. Tax planning is also critical. It should be part of your budget homework, thinking about when you're going to be profitable. I also say tax planning is critical because a lot of people make decisions on location based on preferential tax policies to foreign investors that are not guaranteed to be long-term. So if you think that you're only going to be profitable in 5 years and you're choosing a location where today there's a preferential policy, how do you know in 5 years that you're going to have that still available? So you do need to have this overall balance and look around the tax planning aspect. But again, it is important to talk to a local tax advisor. You can also talk to your law firm, talk to overseas as well about that whole tax planning component. All right, those are the questions that I wanted to touch on. Just briefly, how you can work with Woodburn is we offer all of these services to our clients, from brand advisory, trademark search registration, business plan, budget validation, incorporation advisory, incorporation setup. We also are incorporation agents ourselves. We do competitor business scope benchmarking, which might be a great activity for you to do when looking at your business activities. What do the business scopes of your competitors look like? Might give you great insight. We offer appointments of supervisors, finance managers, and non-executive directors. We provide mentorship programs, tax advisory. We then also offer outsourcing solutions for ongoing accounting, tax, and payroll functions. And we can also help to recruit for in-house finance teams if that's the direction that the company is looking to do. And if you are interested in setting up your company in China, if you just want to have a conversation, you can email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com. To finish off, I want to thank everybody in the community for either downloading, watching live, or watching on replay these roundtables. Again, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And just to highlight what the upcoming topics are, for the next 7 sessions, we're going to be looking at 5 reasons to switch your company to a China limited liability, meaning you already have a rep office in China. We're going to look at 10 reasons why some businesses are not successful in the Chinese market, 4 areas that are eating away at profit margins. And then we've got a series that's really around HR issues. Why have I put it then? I've done it strategically. The reason is because on October 16th, there are the Lianghai sessions that are coming up, which is the re-election of the prime ministers. And we have a feeling that there are going to be quite a few changes after that week long of meetings. There are rumors that quarantine is going to be going down to three days, and there might be other issues around the applications for visas for foreigners and whatnot. So I've really done that strategically around that time because we're hoping to get more insight around those topics then as well. So if any of those are interesting to you, then please do not forget to either subscribe, forward to your colleagues who might find this all interesting, or alternatively, just come and join in live or watch on replay, whatever is the most convenient to you. I want to thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, Irina, for joining. Take care and goodbye.